Hello everyone, welcome back. So let's take a look at this exporting RS thing. The main idea is we want to copy and instance this cliff multiple times, and the most efficient way to do this is to export this as what we call an RS proxy, which is basically the format that Redshift uses under the hood. And we can say okay, go export this rock, include the shading and everything on it, and then we can instance it, rotate it, scale it, and things like that, and it will be very, very efficient to render this geometry. So let's go to the out context, create a Redshift proxy output, and the object I want to include is the sharp cliff, and let's make sure we point to the high-res rock. And that's pretty much it. I'm going to leave all the settings to be the same. I'm going to export this as sharp live, and let's render this to disk. And by default it will embed and export any shader that is assigned to it, and it's doing that now. So if we click, we have our file. It's 34 megabytes. And Redshift doesn't store just the geometry and shaders. It includes other things that will speed up a radius map caching and the KD tree generation. So it actually makes the render quite fast. And the next thing, we need to read this proxy. We can use the same node to do that, but I prefer not to. So I personally avoid doing that. And I'm going to say sharp main PRX for proxy, and go under the Redshift tab, and then proxy, enable proxy file, and we paste in the file. So now I'm going to copy this, and let's go to the Redshift ROP, and let's hit render, and now we should see our rock rendering. Now it's not rendering, so let's see why that is happening. So we have look dev cam, and let's make sure override. This is everything is display mode is mesh. So this should. Okay, let's check one more thing. I'm gonna load in a I'm gonna copy. Let's load in an older cache. See if that fixes the issue. Still the same. Okay, let's do one last thing, which I don't think is the issue. I'm gonna have some geometry here just in case Redshift is looking for some geometry here, and I don't need this. So let's hit render, and there it is. It needs some geometry in the scene, so this is not rendering the low-res geometry. It's rendering the high-res geometry. And let me load in our actual cache. And that's our rock. Yeah, so we have to have some geometry here. But it doesn't matter what we do, what this is. It just needs something, I guess, for Houdini to work. Let's try with the box. Yep, so it's loading the cache. It just needs a geometry. Maybe it's a way for Redshift to ignore anything that is empty, any cells that are empty. But let's use this visualizer. It's fine. I don't need that. Okay, so the next thing is we're gonna use an instance node. I'm gonna call this sharp instance. And inside this instance tab, I'm gonna drag and drop the proxy I'm gonna set the instancing mode to full instancing, and I don't need this at the moment. So let's dive inside. And by default it has an add node that adds 1 point. I'm gonna create a grid. I'm gonna scatter points on it. And let's make sure the look dev camera can see that. I'm gonna move it. And this is the node that we want to render. You can see all the boxes are on top of each other. And let's go here. And let's hit render. And we should see, yep, all the rocks overlapping on top of each other. Now what we need to do is we need to provide a p-scale attribute and an orient attribute to control this. So let's go up. I'd like to do this. I'm going to pin the viewport, and I'm going to dive inside and control this. I'm going to set this to 110. And you can see now we have less copies, and we can create an attribute randomize and call this p-scale, and this is going to control the size of the rocks. Now for the orientation we need something different. I'm going to use a point VOP, and we need to create a matrix basically, and we need to create an orient attribute. So let's dive inside this point VOP and create a bind export and call this orient, and it's a four floats. And what we need to provide is we can use a rotate node and basically convert the rotation into a 3x3 matrix, and then from a 3x3 matrix we convert the 3x3 matrix into a 4x4, and then we extract what we call a quaternion. So let's create these nodes. I need a matrix 4 to matrix 3, and then a matrix 3 to quaternion. Okay, I can type quaternion. A matrix to quaternion. Matrix 3 to quaternion. You can see the type here. And this is what we feed in. And now we have to create a matrix. And we can use a rotate node, which provides us a 4x4 matrix. And then for the axis, we're going to use an up vector. So that's 0, 1, 0, and this is going to be our rotation. You can see now the rocks are rotating, and this is in radiant, so we want to change it in degree. So I'm going to create radiant to degree. Degree to radian. Yeah, and now we can use between 0 and 360. So 360 is not going to move because it's a full rotation. 359, and it's going to start to move. Cool. So what we can do now is we can generate a random number that goes between 0 and 1, and then fit range that. So let's use the point ID and generate a random number based on the ID, and then fit range that between minus 360 and 360. And this is going to give us 2 rotations basically. So if we connect that, let's try 0. It's not changing too much. Sorry, not ID, point number. So now we have random rotation along that axis, and we have p-scale. Now obviously we need some points, more interesting points, and I have already a setup that I'm going to copy. So let's copy this. And what this is basically points. So what this is a grid, and let's connect the rotation here. So we get some rotation. So I have one grid with few points, and these are big cliffs, and then I have mid-sized cliffs. Not this, mid-sized cliffs with few big ones and a lot of small ones, and then I have the close-up ones, and then I have another variation. So it's just layering all these together, and there's nothing crazy here, there's nothing complex. It's just scattering some points and then adding the p-scale attribute, and at the end we have rotation. That's all. So this is all the cliffs. And let's take a look at the tilt camera, and that's all the cliff geometry. It's floating up a bit, so I'm gonna scale it, move it down, move everything down like that. And that's pretty much it. I only have the triangle, which is hand created. So let's hide this. I'm gonna copy this sharp cliff. I'm gonna hide it, and let's dive inside. It's recomputing this, so I'm gonna cache it. Okay, temp, let's load that, and we should see, yep. So what I've done with this, I believe, is something like this. And right click, align to world. That's our triangle geometry, and then I copied one more time and I did something like this. So that's pretty much the triangle, and I'll show the final geometry for this and copy them from the other scene. But for now, what I want to do is I'm going to use these sharp cliffs, sharp instance, and I'm going to include everything with it. So the ship, the ocean, and all of it, and just the HDR. And let me check the height. So yeah, it's actually moved it quite a bit. So -45. And I also moved it on the X, I believe, to bring it closer to the ocean. And what I did, so let's do the same thing. So what I did is we have an ocean bottom and an ocean render. I also made another copy of this. Let me copy that and lower the render settings. And I scaled this to, let's say, 10,000 by 10,000. And I moved it back like that. And these cliffs, I'm gonna move them all the way to the edge. And now I have full coverage, and I have to make sure that I have an ocean bottom as well for the second part. So I'm gonna copy this. And I'm gonna move it and scale it. I mean, we could do it properly, but it's fine. So something like that. And I'm gonna include all of this in the render. So ocean render, ocean bottom, close up, and let's hit render. And it shouldn't take too long for it to start rendering, because those proxies are quite fast to read. And the ocean, we haven't done, we didn't add a huge amount of geometry, especially that it's very far off in the background, so it's not going to subdivide it that much. And why is this here? Yes, because we're using the look dev cam. So let's use the anim cam, which is cam 5 tilt, and let's hit render. Cool. Very close. So what I'm going to do next is I'm gonna desaturate the cliffs. I think they're very saturated. I'm gonna hide the ship or desaturate the ship because it's giving us it's making it harder for us to read the colors.